A woman can win every argument in a courtroom and still drive home at night with nothing waiting for her but the sound of her own key in the lock. At 47, Gail Redmond had built the kind of career that people described with words like formidable and relentless. Her name was on the door of one of Toronto's most respected law firms, a firm she had rebuilt from the ground up after her mentor retired, after her marriage ended, after the year she did not speak about to anyone. Partners deferred to her judgment. Junior associates timed their bathroom breaks around her mood. Clients flew in from Calgary and Vancouver just to sit across the table from her. She never hesitated in that building. She measured words instead of risk, cross-examined instead of confessed, and moved from one case to the next the way a person moves through rooms in a house they no longer live in, efficiently, without sentiment. But every evening, when the last associate had gone home and the corridor outside her office grew quiet, the truth came back. The apartment on King Street, cleaned twice a week, by someone she had never properly met. The kitchen where the good dishes stayed in the cabinet because there was no occasion to take them out. The second bedroom she had locked 3 years ago, after the last of what might have been. Her marriage to Peter had ended not with shouting but with a kind of mutual exhaustion. Two people who had stopped recognizing each other somewhere between the third clinic appointment and the grief that followed. She had thrown herself back into work. Work was reliable. Work did not leave. That October afternoon Gail left the office on foot. The air off Lake Ontario had turned sharp overnight, and the maples along the side streets were finally letting go of their leaves. She had no destination. She told herself she needed air. What she actually needed was noise. Enough of the city's ordinary sound to cover whatever was trying to surface inside her. She had walked perhaps 15 minutes when she saw it. Lakeview Gardens. A modest long-term care residence set back from the street behind a low iron fence, with a small garden where a few late chrysanthemums had survived the first frost. The building was unremarkable. Pale brick large windows. A wooden sign by the gate that someone had recently painted over. The kind of place that tried hard to look welcoming and mostly succeeded. Outside on a wooden bench beside the front path an elderly woman sat alone. She was small and fine-boned, dressed in a gray wool coat that had been carefully pressed but was thinning at the collar. White hair pinned back neatly. Hands folded in her lap over a cloth bag that looked as if it had made 1,000 such trips. When Gail drew level with the gate, the woman looked up. Something in that look made Gail slow down. "Excuse me." The woman's voice was quiet, apologetic before the sentence had even begun. "I'm sorry to trouble you, I can see you're in a hurry." Gail was not in a hurry. She had nowhere specific to go. She stopped. "I wonder if I could ask you something." The woman pressed her lips together, as if she were choosing the words very carefully. "It's a strange thing to ask, I know that. But, would you come inside with me, just for a few minutes, and tell them you're my daughter?" The request landed between them on the cold sidewalk. Gail stared at her. "I'm sorry," Gail said carefully. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. We haven't met." "No," the woman said, "we haven't. My name is Irene Quinlan. I've been sitting here since this morning hoping someone would stop." Her voice did not waver but her hand sinned slightly around the cloth bag. Most people didn't. Gail looked at her, really looked, the way she looked at witnesses who were about to tell her something important. There was no confusion in Irene Quinlan's. No senility, no desperation born of illness. Only a clear, quiet, painful kind of need. "Why me?" Gail asked. Irene gave a small sad smile. "Because you stopped." The simplicity of that answer caught Gail off guard. In her world people stopped for reasons. Interest, obligation, networking, calculation. She had not, in a very long time, encountered someone who credited a stranger simply for pausing. "What's inside?" Gail said, nodding toward the building. Irene turned toward the window nearest the bench. Behind the glass, just visible in the warm interior light, a figure moved. Small, white-haired, searching. "My sister," Irene said. "Edna, she's been here for 3 months. And they're about to move her somewhere I can't follow." Through the glass a face pressed closer. Not frightened exactly. Bewildered, the way a person looks when they've woken in an unfamiliar room. The face scanned the garden until it found the bench, found Irene, and then went still. Gail felt something she could not quite name move through her chest. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said. Irene looked down at her folded hands. "There is a meeting this afternoon. They want to transfer Edna to the memory care wing. Separate unit, different building, different staff. Once she's there, I can't simply walk over and sit with her the way I do now." She raised her eyes. "If I go into that meeting alone, I am one old woman with no power and no credentials. If I walk in with my daughter, someone who looks like she knows how the world works, perhaps they will take me seriously enough to listen." Gail was quiet for a moment. In 22 years of law she had heard complicated requests. She had been asked to defend the indefensible, to argue for the morally questionable, to use words to reshape what had seemed like settled reality. But she had never been asked to simply stand next to an old woman and be believed. I don't know anything about your sister, Gail said. Or you. I wouldn't know what a daughter would know. No daughter knows everything, Irene said quietly. They only need to see that someone is here. The wind moved through the maple overhead, and a small cascade of red leaves drifted between them. From inside the building, a voice reached through the glass, thin, uncertain, with the particular pitch of someone who is not yet panicking but is close. Rennie? Irene closed her eyes briefly, the way a person does when a sound reaches something very deep. That's her, she said. She gets anxious when she can't see me. Gail looked at the window. Edna had pressed one palm flat against the glass. Her expression was not a child's. She was clearly an adult woman, a whole lifetime behind her eyes, but the fear in it was as unguarded as a child's, and that unguardedness was harder to look at than grief. All right, Gail said. She was not entirely sure why. Irene looked up. Something moved across her face. Not quite relief, not yet. Something more fragile than that. Like a person who has been holding their breath so long they are no longer sure they remember how to exhale. Just please, Irene said softly. Say it as if you mean it. They walked into, together. The interior of Lakeview Gardens smelled of cedar, and something faintly herbal, with the low hum of a television somewhere down the hall. The floors were clean, the walls painted a warm yellow that was clearly trying to offset the institutional feeling, and almost succeeded. A woman at the reception desk looked up with a professionally pleasant expression. Mrs. Quinlan, we weren't expecting. My daughter came, Irene said. She was able to make it after all. Gail felt the words form in her throat before she had consciously decided to say them. She stepped forward and offered her hand across the counter.
Gail, she said. Quinlan.
The surname came out half a second after the first name, just perceptibly late. The receptionist smiled and shook her hand. Lovely, I'll let Miss Finch know you're both here. They moved toward the common room and Irene touched Gail's sleeve. Just her fingertips, the lightest possible contact, as if she were afraid of asking too much. Thank you, she said again very quietly. Don't thank me yet, Gail said, but she did not move away. Edna Quinlan was seated by the far window, a blue cardigan buttoned to the collar, both hands resting in her lap on a folded piece of knitting she did not seem to be working on. She was smaller than Irene and her hair had gone fully white, but the shape of her face, the same line of cheekbone, the same curve of the mouth, told you immediately these two women had grown up in the same house, learned the world from the same kitchen table. When Irene came through the door, Edna's whole body changed. Not dramatically, she didn't stand or reach out, but the tension in her shoulders released in one slow breath, the way a room changes when someone finally opens a window. You came back, Edna said. I always come back, Irene said. She sat beside her sister and took her hand, covering it with both of hers. Edna looked at Gail with cautious curiosity. Her gaze was direct in the particular way of people who have forgotten to perform social discretion. Are you staying? She asked. Gail had not expected that question. Not who are you or why are you here, simply are you staying? For a while, Gail said. Edna nodded, satisfied. She patted the empty chair on her other side. Sit then. Rennie tells stories better when people sit. Gail sat. For the next while, Irene spoke. Not about the meeting, not about care plans or facility policies, or the transfer scheduled for the end of the week. She spoke about the house they had grown up in outside of Kingston. About the winter their furnace broke and their father heated the kitchen with the oven door open. About how Edna had collected every stray cat in the neighborhood, and their mother had, somehow, always let her keep one, including a large orange tom they'd named Jeffrey, who knocked things off counters with what seemed like deliberate contempt. About the summer they both worked at the same restaurant and covered for each other. So many times they eventually lost track of who owed whom. Edna smiled at parts of the story, laughed before the punchline sometimes asked the same question twice. Sometimes her eyes went briefly distant and then Irene would say her name, just her name, nothing more, and Edna would return. It was such a small thing, just a name spoken in a particular voice, but it worked every time. Gail watched it happen and felt something she had spent years insulating herself against. The particular ache of witnessing love that has been tested long enough to become a reflex. A woman in a blazer appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Quinlan, we're ready for you now. Irene stood, and Edna's hand reached for her sleeve immediately. Where are you going? Just to the office, I'll come back. You always say that. Because I always do. Irene bent slightly and pressed her lips to her sister's forehead. Wait right here. Edna watched them go, her hand still extended slightly into the air where Irene had been. The office was small and orderly, with a framed certification on the wall, and a single potted plant on the windowsill that was surviving, not thriving. The care coordinator, Lorraine Finch, sat across the desk with a resident file, and the measured expression of someone accustomed to having difficult conversations with families. Mrs. Quinlan, she said. I understand this is hard to hear, we all want what's best for Edna. Then let her stay where she is, Irene said, not sharply, simply. Lorraine opened the file. Her confusion episodes have increased significantly over the past 6 weeks. She walked into another residence room twice last week. She's been awake at 3 in the morning, disoriented, asking for people who, she glanced at the page, who aren't there. She's asking for me, Irene said. Because I'm not there at 3 in the morning, because I'm in my own room down the hall. Mrs. Quinlan, the memory care wing has. I know what it has. Irene's voice stayed even, but Gail heard the steel in it. It has locked doors and structured programming and staff who are trained and kind and have never once heard Edna's laugh. They don't know she hates the smell of bleach because it reminds her of the hospital where our mother died. They don't know that if you hum the first few bars of something she recognizes, she'll follow the melody back to herself. She folded her hands on the desk. You can move her body to a safer unit, but if she wakes up and I'm not there, you will lose her long before the disease does. The room was quiet. Gail looked at Lorraine Finch and saw the small movement at the corner of the woman's jaw. That meant she was working to keep her expression neutral. Against something that was trying to get through it. Gail leaned forward. What would it take, she said, to revisit the transfer decision, not cancel it tonight, revisit it, with additional medical input and a realistic support plan? Lorraine looked at her. In terms of keeping Edna in her current room? In terms of understanding whether separation is actually in her best interest, or whether it is simply the more administratively convenient option? There was a pause, a careful one. That's a process, Lorraine said. Most things worth doing are, Gail said. What does that process look like? She asked every question she knew how to ask, methodically, without aggression, the way she had cross-examined expert witnesses for 2 decades. Not what she had been told Edna needed, what the evidence actually showed, what alternatives had been considered, what a specialist in dementia care would say about the role of emotional consistency in managing cognitive decline. She was not performing authority. She simply knew how institutions worked, and she knew how to find the room they left for exceptions when someone pushed carefully enough at the right door. Irene sat beside her, very still, watching. When they finally stood to leave, Lorraine said, I can put the transfer on hold for 72 hours. That's what I can offer. If you come back with outside medical input and a proposed support plan, I'll take it to the board. Irene's eyes closed briefly. 72 hours. Thank you, Gail said before Irene could speak. She shook Lorraine's hand. We'll have something for you by tomorrow afternoon. They walked back to the common room without speaking. Edna looked up when they came through the door, and the relief on her face was so immediate and unguarded that Gail had to look away for a moment. You came back, Edna said. Of course I did, Irene said. Edna looked at Gail. Are you still staying? Yes, Gail said, still here. She did not know yet what that would come to mean. It was in the hallway that Irene stopped and turned to her. I should tell you something, Irene said. I think I should tell you something first, Gail said. They looked at each other. Gail spoke carefully. My name is Gail Redmond, not Quinlan. I'm a senior partner at a law firm on Bay Street. We've never met before today. She paused. I'll understand if you're angry. Irene studied her face for a long moment, then unexpectedly she gave a small quiet exhale that was almost a laugh. I know, she said. I knew at the desk. Your pause before the last name. She shook her head gently. I'm not angry, you stayed anyway, that's what mattered. Gail felt something shift in her chest. Some internal door that had been wedged shut for a long time nudged open by an inch. What were you going to tell me? She asked. Irene's expression became something older, more private. That I haven't always been the patient one, she said. Edna was the one who waited for me when we were young. After our mother died, I was the one who went strange with grief. I stopped talking for almost a month. I couldn't find the words. She looked toward the common room door. Edna would sit beside me at the kitchen table every evening and talk enough for both of us. She never asked me to come back. She just stayed close enough that coming back was easy. Irene's voice dropped slightly. I've been trying to do the same for her ever since. Gail thought of her own apartment. The silence that waited for her each evening, like a piece of furniture she had arranged herself, and could not figure out how to move. That's what you meant, Gail said slowly. What you said to Lorraine Finch, it's never just about the room. It's never just about the room, Irene said. That night Gail sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, and did what she had spent 22 years learning to do quickly and well. She found the leading geriatric neurologist in the city who specialized in dementia care. She drafted a letter outlining the specifics of Edna's situation, the documented role of consistent emotional anchors in managing cognitive decline, and the request for an expedited assessment. She drafted a secondary document, a proposed care supplement, outlining the additional support that could be put in place if Edna remained in her current room. It was past midnight when she stopped. The apartment was quiet, it was always quiet. She got up and went to the window and stood looking at the city, the lights of the towers along the waterfront, the dark plate of the lake beyond them. She thought about the year Peter had left, not the leaving itself, that had been almost a relief by then, but the evening 3 weeks later when she had stood in the second bedroom, holding a small soft thing she had bought in anticipation of a child she had lost, and understood that she did not know who she was anymore outside of the work, the argument, the bill of costs. She had put it away, and then she had gone back to the office. She had told herself it was strength now. Standing at the window at midnight with Irene Quinlan's voice still in her ears, she just stayed close enough that coming back was easy. She was less certain what to call it. The next morning she was at Lakeview Gardens before 9. Irene was already in the common room. She looked up when Gail came through the door, and the surprise on her face was immediately replaced by something Gail recognized, distantly, as the expression of a person who has stopped expecting to be surprised by kindness. "You came back," Irene said. "I said I would." Gail set a coffee carrier on the table, 3 cups from the Tim Hortons 2 blocks over. "I didn't know what Edna takes." Irene looked at the third cup. Double, same as always." She paused. "How did you know to bring 3? "I didn't," Gail said. "I just thought she'd want one." Edna looked at the cup Irene handed her and held it with both hands, pleased in a direct and uncomplicated way that Gail found unexpectedly beautiful. "Where did you come from?" Edna said, looking at Gail. "From down the street," Gail said. Edna nodded as if this was the exact right answer. "It's cold outside, I can feel it through the window." She wrapped her hands more firmly around the cup. "Rennie says the lake makes it colder." "It does," Gail said. "You can feel it all the way to Bay Street on days like this." By noon Gail had made 4 phone calls. Dr. Marcus Webb, a geriatric neurologist, agreed to come to the facility the following morning for an observation session. A private care firm confirmed they could provide an additional evening aide, trained in memory support, available during the overnight hours most likely to cause Edna distress. Gail had drafted everything as a clean, structured proposal. Cost covered, logistics outlined, nothing left for Lorraine Finch to call unworkable. Irene found her in the small family waiting area, papers spread across the side table. "You don't have to do this," Irene said. Gail looked at her. "I know. We're not your family." Gail looked down at the papers for a moment. Then she said, "Irene, in the past 18 hours your sister asked me 3 times if I was staying. Each time I said yes, each time she believed me." She gathered the papers evenly. "I think that makes me responsible for being the kind of person who means it." Irene sat down across from her. She did not say anything for a moment. "You lost someone," she said finally, not a question. Gail was quiet. "You don't have to tell me," Irene said. "No," Gail said. And then with a slowness that surprised her she told her anyway, not everything but the shape of it. Peter. The clinic on St. Clair with the waiting room full of couples who all held their breath the same way. The morning she had called the office at 6 a.m. because she could not bear to be alone in the apartment with what had just not happened again. The second bedroom she had locked, because opening it felt like stepping into fire. Irene listened without filling the silence. When Gail finished Irene said, "I'm sorry." "I managed," Gail said. "Managing and living aren't the same thing," Irene said quietly. "Edna told me that once. Years ago when I was the one who needed to hear it." She smiled faintly. She was quite sharp back then. The following morning Dr. Webb arrived at 9 and spent 2 hours with Edna and Irene in the common room, observing, asking quiet questions, watching the way Edna responded to Irene's presence versus the staff's. He took notes without making it feel clinical. He spoke to Edna directly, not around her. In Lorraine Finch's office afterward the meeting held more people. Lorraine, Dr. Webb, Gail, Irene, and a member of the care review board who had driven in from the north end of the city. Dr. Webb set his report on the table. "Edna Quinlan requires specialized care," he said. "No one here is disputing that, but what I observed this morning is clinically significant. Her agitation decreases markedly in Irene's presence, not just somewhat but consistently and immediately. Her language retrieval improves. Her disorientation episodes are shorter and less severe. That is not anecdotal, that is a measurable pattern." The board member looked at the report. "You're saying the proximity to her sister is therapeutic?" "I'm saying the proximity to her sister is irreplaceable," Dr. Webb said. "You can train excellent staff. You cannot replicate 67 years of shared history." Irene pressed 2 fingers briefly to her mouth. Gail laid out the support plan, the additional aid, the overnight monitoring protocol, the weekly specialist review. She spoke clearly and without theater, the way she spoke in court when she knew the facts were on her side, and the argument only needed to be stated cleanly. When she finished, the room was quiet. Lorraine Finch looked at the proposal for a long moment. Then she looked at Irene. "Mrs. Quinlan," she said, "when you came in for the first meeting, I had already made my recommendation. I thought the decision was straightforward." She paused. "I was looking at the file, I wasn't looking at them." Irene said nothing. "With the additional safeguards outlined here," Lorraine said, "and Dr. Webb's assessment, I am prepared to recommend that the transfer be suspended indefinitely, pending monthly review." The words took a moment to reach Irene. When they did, she did not cry. She simply lowered her head for a moment, hands folded in her lap, as if she were receiving something very heavy and needed to be careful with it. "Thank you," she said. They found Edna in her usual chair, the piece of knitting in her lap, looking out at the garden where the last of the October light was going gold across the grass. Irene sat beside her and took her hand. Edna looked at her. "You were gone." "I know, but I came back." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." Edna considered this. Then she looked at Gail, who had taken the chair on her other side, the same chair she had been directed to on the very first day. Edna's face was calm, assessing. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" she asked. Gail hesitated only a second. "Yes." "Good." Edna turned back to the window. "Rennie needs company too, she doesn't like to ask." Irene laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and for a moment she looked 30 years younger, like the woman in a story about a broken furnace and a winter in Kingston, and a cat named Jeffrey who knocked things off counters on purpose. In the weeks that followed, Gail came back. At first she told herself it was because the case wasn't fully settled. There were monthly reviews to monitor, paperwork to keep current, advocacy that might still be needed. These things were true. They were also, she understood eventually, not the reason. She came because Edna asked where she was when she didn't. She came because Irene had started saving her the chair by the window. She came because there was a specific hour on Thursday afternoons when the three of them sat together in the common room while the light went amber through the glass, and Irene told stories. And Edna smiled at the parts she remembered, and Gail found, to her considerable surprise, that she was laughing at things she had no personal history with. Jeffrey the cat, a broken canoe on Rideau Lake, the particular misery of a family road trip to Sudbury in a car without air conditioning, and that the laughing felt like something coming back to her that she hadn't realized she'd misplaced. She did not open the second bedroom right away, that took until January. But she opened the window first. The night she came home from Lakeview Gardens and found herself at the kitchen table with an actual recipe in her hand. Something she'd asked Irene for, a specific kind of shortbread Edna had always loved, cardamom and orange zest. She stood for a moment and recognized the feeling. It was small and specific and ordinary. It was exactly the same feeling as walking into a room and finding someone there who is glad you came. She made the shortbread. She brought it the next morning in a tin. Edna ate 3 pieces and said perfectly clearly, "You got the cardamom right, not everyone does." Gail looked at Irene. Irene was already looking at her, smiling with the particular warmth of a person who has been paying attention for a long time. "She has good days," Irene said. "I know," Gail said, "I'm learning which ones." It had started with one request on a cold sidewalk in October. It had become something neither of them had a clean word for. Not family exactly, not friendship exactly, something assembled from smaller pieces. A Thursday afternoon, a shared pot of tea, a tin of shortbread made the right way. 2 sisters and a woman who had learned, slowly, that staying was not the same as settling. That presence was its own kind of promise. That you could lose so much and still, if someone left the door open at the right moment, find your way back into warmth. The afternoon Edna reached over and patted Gail's hand without reason, without preamble, simply because Gail was there and it seemed like the right thing to do. Gail does not say anything, she just stayed. The way someone stays when they have finally understood that staying is the whole of it, and that it was enough, and that enough, after a very long time of managing, felt like more than she had known how to ask for.